Hello, everybody. Welcome to the RCA webinar, Generation RCA talk this evening. My name is Paul Thompson. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the college, and it is a real pleasure to have so many people joining us this evening, this morning. It may even be midday wherever you are in the world, because I know a lot of people are joining us from many different countries to listen to Evan Sharp, who is in conversation with Adrian Lahoud, the Dean of Architecture here at the Royal College of Art. Now, we've chosen Adrian Lahoud, the Dean of Architecture, to converse with Evan, the founder and Chief Creative Officer of Pinterest, for a very good reason, because on the first occasion that I met Evan, actually in San Francisco, it was very, very clear when he showed me his Pinterest account just how obsessed with architecture he is. He actually trained as an architect himself at Columbia University in New York, having originally done a first degree at University of Chicago in history. So he's a cultured, inquisitive, and very intelligent guy. But he's also somebody who clearly has a very strong entrepreneurial streak. When he was at Columbia, he met Ben Silverman, and both of them were very, very interested in, I guess, collecting and acquiring, and collecting things that were of interest to them that they didn't necessarily feel had to be a sort of an expose of themselves for the world to actually look at. But more kind of a personal album and a sort of a visual record for themselves, which I think is intriguing, and it raises lots of different questions about social media and its purpose. I'm going to hand over to both Evan and to Adrian for them to begin the conversation. We're going to have some questions from students and alumni in the audience afterwards. But again, Evan, thank you so much for beaming in from San Francisco. It's a real honor for us to have you here. And I know that we're all going to find your conversations and your thoughts very, very, very interesting and inspiring. So over to you both.
Thanks for having me. This is my first international travel in over a year, and I'm super excited to be wherever we are right now. It's really makes me feel really great.
Thank you also, Paul, for your intro, and thank you, Evan, for joining us. I remember very fondly the chat we had, the Vice-Chancellor's Circle, or the Chancellor's Circle dinner some time ago. I have to start, it's been a momentous year for all of us, lots of really profound challenges. And I know we're slowly emerging from things here in the UK and the US. So I have to ask, how's the last year been for you, and how are you doing?
It's really sucked. Excuse my language. I mean, come on, this has been such a difficult year. Yeah. And I think I've had so many blessings, right, relative to so many people, but I've been very lonely. Yeah. And working very hard, but very stuck and very trapped and very uncertain. Yeah. But, I really wanted to start by saying how much I appreciate the chance to chat with you and with Paul and with all the students. And I was trying to put myself in the shoes of what it must have been like to be a student this past year studying. Yeah. And my goodness, what an experience. I really have no idea what it's been like, but, I just wanted to say for me, architecture school was so formative. Yeah. And so precious and such a creative experience that the opportunity to speak with students doing the same thing, it's really touching, and so I'm really grateful to be here.
Wow, I'm really pleased that you said that, and I agree. It's been incredibly difficult, and I think all of our students have been in this completely difficult situation of being used to kind of being in a social setting, to learn and to be creative together and to have discuss things. And suddenly to be sitting in the same room every day, staring at the same screen, doing Zoom calls, has been really mentally challenging for a lot of people. And it's been a year of, huge ups and downs for all of them, and also all the cognitive dissonance, I think, as well, of knowing, being aware and being sensitive to what's going on around us in the world, and somehow still needing to, get through the day and get on with work. I think that's been just hugely difficult for lots of people. What kinds of coping strategies have you developed? I know that I've gone through all kinds of different phases. I went through obsessively exercising all of the time, maybe, drinking too much on a Friday night regularly as well. I think I've tried everything to kind of get through this year. I wonder what kinds of things you've done to get through the year.
The drinking was the first strategy. It didn't work very well. Beat myself off of that, not entirely. And, I took a meditation in a pretty serious way, which I'd never done before. And that's been really grounding. Yeah. And other than that, I mean, I've just been sort of suffering in my minor way and maybe not coping very well. Yeah. But, the thing I'd say that that is interesting as a reflection maybe is my understanding of human emotions is that they are psychological states or neurochemical states, but that they're social. Yeah. So happiness or sadness or anger, it's not just one person feeling it, they permeate groups of people. Yeah. One thing I've noticed is that by being cut off from people physically, I'm so much more susceptible to that emotional input coming through the internet. Yeah. Through the sort of global nervous system we've built. And I'm so much more susceptible or overpowered by stories that I hear and read digitally. And that's pretty remarkable. It's very different than it was for me a year ago. Yeah, I that's really fascinating, because I think emotions are contagious. Yeah. And when you're isolated at home, and your only window out into the world is through social media, then I think you kind of start to register all of those things. And there's been so much tragedy in the world in the last year, and there still is. So how you insulate yourself against it, I think, has been really difficult. As someone who's been meditating for 12 years, I swear by it as well. And actually, after this year, I think it'd be really interesting to bring in those kinds of practices into the school, maybe more formally, and because I think they're just incredibly useful to cope with all of the trash that they're going on at the moment. It's an important tool. Yeah, just a minute on that. I've done therapy and things in my life, and my experience of psychology and therapy is that it's mostly about removing negative states, about removing negative histories or experiences or traumas, which is incredible. Yeah. But meditation, and especially if you find a lineage that's not just meditation, but that's rooted to some tradition, it can be about cultivating flourishing, which is very different than psychotherapy in general. And that's been a whole window into what's possible in terms of human experience. That's really exciting. That's amazing. I don't want to intrude, but do you mind if I ask you what kind of meditation practice you've been doing? Yeah, no, I mean, I feel almost embarrassed to talk about it because it's so California and East-West, but I've fallen into this lineage that's really rooted in ancient Tibet, in the Tibetan Bon religion. And I say embarrassed because I don't know much about its actual roots. I haven't been able to travel there. I've been stuck in California, but understanding this many thousands of year old tradition and this cathedral of culture that they've built and the role meditation plays is something that I'm just starting to understand. But again, having meditation not entirely disconnected from maybe some of its ancient origins has been much more meaningful than just using an app, for example. Yeah. I mean, I've been getting up to do Qigong at 6:30 in the morning in a park for about 12 years. So I think that's wow. It's been the most important thing I've ever learned in my life. So wow. Yeah. Without any doubt. I guess a lot of people have been reflecting on this year, and it's prompted, and also the sense that we've gotten straight into a kind of really serious conversation. I think it's been a year of prompting quite deeper reflections on what we're doing. I know that in the school, I've thought a lot about, what is our mission? What are we contributing to the world? And I think a lot of my colleagues and certainly a lot of the students, it's really brought those kinds of questions into a new focus. I wonder whether, both personally, but also with Pinterest, whether, you guys have been having similar kinds of discussions over there. Yes, I think the organization we've built, so Pinterest is about 2,500 employees now. So it's gotten pretty big in terms of organizations, in terms of the infrastructure you need to communicate and align people.
Yeah.
But one thing I've always felt proud about is it is very mission driven, meaning our employees care about the impact we have in the world. And that care is a really important force in the organization, and I really value it. But if I've personally learned something about that this year, it's a little inverted for me, because I think I've spent the last 10 years trying to build an organization that is mission driven.
Yeah.
And the last year, it's really helped me understand how important it is to build an organization that understands how to think about complexity and impact. Right. So many people want to feel this very direct connection. Oh, I'm doing something that's good. And they want to see a story of what they're doing is directly helping somebody or something, which is a very beautiful motivation.
Yeah.
So much of the actual good, positive outcomes the world needs are so much more complex, so much more indirect, that I think the work ahead of at least the company that I'm part of right now is helping to build a level of sophistication. I'm sorry if this is abstract. I'm trying to think of a good story, but I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But trying to help people understand that there's more than just a direct connection, that the complexity of how the world works is a really difficult thing to wrap your head around.
Yeah, but I think that's in a way it's already in the ethos of Pinterest, no, in the sense that you describe it as an environment, and that's a kind of like environmental perspective, no, to try to take a more fuller view of the things that are happening out there in the world, and to understand the kind of complexity and their nuance, maybe.
Yeah, I think, okay, here's interesting. Maybe, so I get architecture background, to think about space pretty naturally, environments. One thing I've learned the last year is that what architecture is to three-dimensional space, creating boundaries, creating openings, creating conditions, helping people have certain states of being. Stories are that to the fourth dimension of time.
Yeah.
They create structures and relationships, and we inhabit the stories we choose to inhabit, and they teach us how to relate to people and things. And I think being very careful about which stories you let in, not settling for a single story or two stories about something, but being diligent in finding multiple stories. And understanding that in an organization that's as large as ours, there is not one building that contains this team. It's actually the stories that we tell ourselves and inhabit are a much more potent form of architecture organizationally. That's been a very difficult lesson for us to learn that I think is going to serve us well going forward, I hope.
I think that sounds like an incredible insight for someone in an organization to have. Could you tell us a little bit about, do you have an example, or could you take us through? Or is it really the beginning of the discussion, maybe? Well,
it sounds good, right? What I said.
Sounds amazing.
Think of us. I mean, what's an example? I mean, this is not to take it out of Pinterest. What's a good story, Adrian?
I mean, for example, right? I could think of we could tell, as a school of architecture, we could tell ourselves, and we do tell ourselves certain stories about why we think we're a really interesting and good school of architecture. Are the stories that we tell ourselves about why we're a really good or interesting school of architecture the right kinds of stories that we should be telling ourselves? Do they reflect the reality? Are they a kind of, and I guess, it's that kind of practice of maybe distrusting the first kind of story that you hear or you want to tell, and then maybe looking a little bit harder to work out whether there are other stories there that are not so obvious but maybe important.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I can't think of an example.
That's okay. That's totally fine. Evan, can you tell us a little bit about, as one of the founders of Pinterest, what's your day-to-day like? What is the role of a founder in a company?
Oof, that's a deep one. Okay. Well, I'd say to all the artists or designers or architects listening, one of the unbelievable things about the time we live in is we don't just have to work for clients if we don't want to. We can actually create maybe an organization or a company or a nonprofit or whatever it is, and in some ways be our own bosses, which is its own opportunity and headache, of course. But the role of founder is something I'm really passionate about, because what I've found in sort of corporate life is that the founder is incredibly important. and incredibly misunderstood and overlooked once the company is larger. I think people think of founders in the beginning of something, obviously, when they're building something from scratch and the entrepreneurship and all that. But at a company with thousands of employees, the founder plays this really unbelievably important role. In my opinion, I'm a little biased. And it's this role of keeping everything in integrity with itself. It's this role of thinking about the spirit of the organization. And for me, that's the spirit of Pinterest. That means, what are we building? Are we thinking long-term? Who are we hiring? Are the stories we're telling aligned with the products we're building, aligned with the buildings we inhabit, aligned with the stories we're telling our customers, aligned with it? There's sort of almost like the way an architect has to bring all of these variables into some sort of holistic understanding. There's an architectural role that at least I play, I hope, as a founder, but almost nobody sees the impact of, because nobody has that sort of meta view of the business.
Yeah.
But that can end up over the long term leading to a much greater outcome for everybody involved.
Okay. One of the other social media companies have been in the news a lot over the last year, and could I ask maybe a few questions around like Pinterest's role as a social media company?
Sure.
So obviously one of the things that social media companies do a lot of is they're able to produce new kinds of insights into user behavior, and with 500 million users, that's a nice pool of data. Could you say a few words about the special kinds of things that you think Pinterest can see in that user group as a social media platform?
Well, it's funny. We used to do these trips before COVID, where we travel 2 or 3 times a year just to talk with users.
Yeah.
Like sit down randomly and one-on-one with people and just talk to them about their phone and about social media and about Pinterest. And it was really rich. And I remember this one experience. We went to Iowa, I think it was 2 years ago, and I met this woman, Jen. And I was talking to her about social media and about friends and about the way she used her phone and talking about Pinterest. And what she said to me was, "Oh, Pinterest isn't about my friends. It's not about what's happening in the world right now. Pinterest is about the future. It's about my dreams. It's about, the home I want to build. It's about the kitchen I want to have. It's about the things I want to wear."
Yeah.
And so I think Pinterest has often been labeled social media.
Mm.
And that label doesn't fully fit.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're wearing the wrong clothes a little bit.
Yeah.
There's some truth to it, but it's not been a platform people come to share things.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a platform people come to sort of discover inspiration, things that, when you look through a field of images, certain ones kind of speak to you, they call out, maybe you bring them closer, and then you look at it in more detail. And then if you really like it, maybe you save it. And then you end up with this collection of imagery that sort of speaks to you, and the images themselves are important, but then the whole also has its own sort of coherence and interest. And so I would say Pinterest is, in a way, it's unique in that it's very much not about what your friends are doing, what's happening in the world, what the politics are. It's about yourself. It's about what you love, and it's about trying to articulate that visually.
Yeah, so it's kind of private social media company, which is a bit of an oxymoron, I guess, in some way. The way that people collect, especially around domestic spaces in their home, and Pinterest, I find also completely fascinating. I don't think that you could get a better kind of registration of people's desires and aspirations and hopes for their domestic environments than looking at people's Pinterest boards. I think that's completely fascinating. And of course, so that's in a very personal sense, but also professionally, I know that it's a really important resource for designers, for interior designers and for architects and those kinds of things. What do you see as that relationship between people in the professions, or especially the value of the home, the way the home figures within Pinterest? As someone who's also, I think, in the middle of a renovation, I understand.
Well, I started Pinterest when I was in architecture school.
Yeah,
because I was hungry for imagery, and I was too lazy to go all the way down to the basement of the library. And I used to, did most of my work like 12 to 6 a.m. and the library was closed. And so I was like, man, what's like a good staircase look like? And then at the time, there wasn't you didn't have the visual media anywhere online the way you do today. So I just started it as a way to bookmark images I found online so I can remember what they are. And so there's a way in which the roots of Pinterest really are in this creative discipline or this set of creative arts.
Yeah.
But I think your question about home, it struck something in me. I did a research project a few years ago where, again, we talked to a lot of Pinterest users, and I learned so much about the way the phone is changing how we relate to ourselves and our lives. How do I talk about this? Maybe a way to talk about this is through the metaphor of the home. Okay. For so many people, I studied architecture. Obviously, you learn about public and private space, very, very basic concepts. For so many people now, I think they can be in their most private spaces. Yeah. They can be in the toilet or in the bedroom or like wherever it is. But because the phone is ubiquitous, psychologically, they can be in this very public mindset. Yeah. And so this boundary between, this gradient between, oh, this is my private space and this is my public space, it's been completely eroded. And then if you're a parent, as I am, the control you feel over helping your child or your children mediate those boundaries is very anxiety producing, because you don't feel like you have the control, that you feel like you need to have to help them have the healthy development. Yeah. So that, I think a lot of the last 10 years has been this real disorientation of publicness and privateness, and this real change of the psychological environment of the home. Yeah. And one of the things I'm the most proud of with Pinterest, and there's things I'm not proud of, is that for a lot of people, as we were talking about, it's one of the only personal or private spaces they have. I mean, really. Yeah. I mean, most of what the phone does is connect you to what's happening in the news, what's happening with your friends, what's happening with celebrities, what's happening that you're not a part of, right? Or maybe it's connecting you to something you've put out that may or may not get feedback. And it's this very public and socially anxiety-producing place at times. But so for a lot of people, and I didn't realize this until I talked to all these users, Pinterest is this one place that's just about them and what they want, and they don't have to worry about like people judging it. Yeah. And psychologically, that is so needed because of this larger context. So that's sort of what came to mind with your question, Adrian.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Yeah, it takes that, it liberates you from having to be performative in front of some kind of imagined audience on social media. And I think that's also one of the really beautiful things about collecting, is you can create your own world, and I think that's a super beautiful answer. I'm going to start introducing some of the students who've joined us, and some of my colleagues who are going to also ask some questions. So the first person I'd like to introduce to come on screen is Nicole St. Jenswood. She's an MA alumni 2019 from Innovation Design Engineering. Are you there, Nicole? Let's give her a second to come back on screen. Oh, Nicole's not coming on screen. So would you like me to read the question then? Okay. So the question from Nicole is, what were the soft signals that a service like Pinterest was needed in the world? What gave you the confidence to pursue the idea?
Thanks for your question, Nicole. And I appreciate you having a boundary and not coming on screen if that's what's happening. What were the soft signals? To be really transparent, I just built Pinterest because I need to use it with my buddy Ben, and didn't think of it as a big tech company or anything like that. And turned out that, what I built for myself in architectural projects ended up being really relevant to what other people were doing creatively, which I'd never guessed. And so I think I'm really lucky just to be transparent about it. And I don't think that's uncommon. Like I worked at Facebook for 1 year, and Facebook wasn't started as some huge tech company. It was started because I guess Mark Zuckerberg wanted to build a Facebook because he wanted to stay in touch with his friends, to be simplistic about it. Google didn't start because it was some huge business plan. It was thesis project. So there's this pattern with at least consumer internet companies where I think they generally start, TikTok's an exception, but they've generally started with the sort of intrinsic need or motivation of the founders, building for themselves, for better and for worse. And that's no different for me and for Pinterest.
Thank you, Nicole. So I'd like to introduce Leah Ryu, who's an MA alumni 2016, also from Innovation Design Engineering. And I think she's coming to us from Seoul in Korea. So
Wow.
Leah, do you want to join us? Hey. Hi, Leah.
Hi, Leah.
Hello, this is Leah. Hi, Evan. My question is, how did you start the startup and how did you get the fund? Is the United States a good place to start a startup?
Yeah, great question, Leah. Let's see. Well, as I mentioned, I ended up designing and building Pinterest during school, and I would not recommend the way I got it funded. What happened was I ended up working with my friend Ben and his friend Paul, and they already had a startup. They'd spent years trying to raise money, and they built a shopping app, and it wasn't quite working out, and so they wanted to change what they were building, and so I helped them build Pinterest, and we sort of reused the funding from their company, and that's had a lot of long-term impacts to how things are structured. But the simplest thing I would say is with something like Pinterest, what's lovely is it wasn't that hard to build. I think I ended up designing and coding it in a month or two. And once we built it and shipped it, it took a few months to get users, but most of the money we raised was after we had user growth and user adoption. And that just made being able to raise money in favorable ways so much easier. And I know that's not an option for every idea or every startup, but that's the path we took. And I think it's given us a lot of flexibility down the road. I'm really grateful for.
Thank you.
Sure. I hope that was helpful, Leah. Thanks for asking.
Thanks, Leah. I'd like to introduce one of my colleagues, Nadia Danhash, who's the Director of Innovation RCA, to come on screen. Nadia runs the RCA's Enterprise Center, which invests in a wide range of early stage companies, from patent-based businesses to digital companies. And the range includes agri-tech, fintech, impact, and sustainability businesses. Hi, Nadia, how are you?
Hello, good to see you. I'm really, hello, Evan, lovely to meet you. I'm really enjoying hearing you talk with Adrian, so thank you for that. I just wanted to know how you built your tribe of pinners, your Pinterest followers. How did you build that user base?
It's funny. We like to say that we should have pivoted, but we weren't smart enough. So we built Pinterest, shipped it. Our friends used it. Our families used it. My family didn't use it as much as I wanted. And, I think 4 or 5 months in, I wasn't even working there full time. It was a side project for me. I think, common sense, like startup lore would have said, the idea is not working. You should go pivot to a new idea. But we didn't. and Ben, who's the CEO now, at the time, he went out and he kind of hand built this early community. He found these blogging networks, mostly of women in the United States, who were using blogs in a way that was very Pinterest-like. It was visual, it was inspiration for living, and got them excited about it and brought them on, brought their networks on. And it started this real word of mouth trend in the United States where we started to grow. People were talking about Pinterest. And what was cool about that was almost all of the consumer tech companies in the United States, at least, have started through the very same kind of like tech early adopter crowds. And Pinterest, it spread through a completely different set of demographics. It spread from the Midwest of the country. A lot of it was mothers, not kind of like tech early adopters. And at a certain point, we were growing so fast, we had to put up like an invite wall. So you had to have an invite to sign up because we weren't technically proficient enough to scale the servers with the demand. Be a lot easier to do that now. But we put this invite wall up, and I think that actually fueled the growth even more, because all of a sudden it became this sort of exclusive thing to get an invite. And to this day, I'll meet people who would describe themselves not as like super tech savvy or interested in technology, who say, oh my gosh, I was super early at Pinterest. I had all these invites to send to all my friends. And so those are some of the things that I think ended up leading to our growth. And then at a certain point, at least in the United States, it felt like, I think it was the holiday season of 2011. It felt like everyone went home for the holidays, for Christmas or whatever holiday they celebrate, and talked about Pinterest. And in that January, the brand had become this very kind of like ubiquitous thing in culture. And since then, it's just been this, process of internationalizing and localizing the content and making sure that we're helping people use it in a very simple way. But that's a version of the story, Nadia. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you.
Or interesting.
it sounds like you kind of understood who might be your target customer, your target user, which is something we're kind of always preaching to our founders. So we have a fintech at the moment that's trying to build a user base, and they're aimed at 20 somethings. So we're kind of saying that's half the battle, knowing who you're going after. And it sounds like with you understood it's likely to be women and bloggers and so on.
Yeah, I'd say you know more about this than I do, Nadia. I just know my story. I really do. But with consumer internet, my experience of these companies is the first version is usually built for the founders to use themselves. So it's this very fast feedback loop and intrinsically motivated creative process. And then at a certain point, I think to your question, you start to ask, well, who else wants to use this? And you end up finding a demographic or a set of people or communities that want to leverage it. And that's right. That's how we did this. That's how Pinterest took off, was through a set of communities that were really interested and aligned with the product, as we call it.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadia, for listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nadia. I'd like to introduce Andrew Honore, who's an alumni from 1995 from architecture and interior design, and he's based in Christchurch in the UK. Andrew is an innovative brand creative director within luxury tourism, retail, fashion, hotel, and spa sectors, with 20 years of conceiving and developing his own projects, including Crowne Plaza London, Battersea, Relais and Chateau Maisons, both in New York and London, and over a dozen standalone new build spas. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Evan. Fantastic talk, I must say. Brilliant. Obviously, being an architect, it's been really inspiration. To say that the inspiration of dreams as your company, I mean, basically to have a company which is a dream catcher is amazing. Fantastic. So what you have touched on it. What I was interested in, how much influence has the training of architecture actually been within the sort of whole creation and the programming really of interest? I mean, it's like you created a whole mood board. That's what it's like. As designers and architects and artists, we have mood boards. So that's what it feels like just hearing what you've done.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Andrew. You know, that's a question I ask myself a lot. I don't know how meta self-aware I am of the answer even fully, but a few things come to mind. One, architecture school it's hard. It's a lot of work. It's just like, that third dimension, this. I mean, it's just, you have to work a lot more. It's like a lot more complexity. It's longer hours. And this is a very maybe boring answer, but I think one thing I learned in architecture school is just to work really, really hard and to have a resilience about knowing that there are so many levels you can go beyond where you are, so many levels of quality, excellence, integrity. So many people just want to stop really early on in what I consider the process. And I think that was really informed by how difficult architecture is to do really, really well. I think a second thing I learned in architecture school was really integrating and synthesizing so many variables. Like nothing is out of scope in architecture. You want to look at culture, you want to look at building systems and materials, you want to look at math, you want to look at, literature. You can incorporate anything you want into architecture, into architectural design and expression. And you can approach it in different ways. You can approach it expressively. What do I have to say? Do I want to express through architecture? Or you can approach it almost like, like how to drive integrity through something. How to kind of look at a system and make micro changes that align all the different components so that they're more harmonious with each other. And I think both of those views of architecture have been incredibly important organizationally in Pinterest and in terms of how people work with each other, for better and for worse, and also in terms of what we're building. I hate, for example, right now that we have this pretty good user experience and really interesting machine learning, but our brand is it's not at all what it could be. Our brand should be the most inspiring. It just should be. That's what the product experience is for our users. So we, as a company, I think we've always done a horrible job. And you might know this coming from your background, Andrew. We've done a horrible job telling our story and driving the kind of cultural impact that I feel like we should be driving. And it's been this strange experience for our users kind of get our brand almost better than the company does. And so I won't go into that super deeply, but it's an example of how I think I just have this view coming out of architecture school that these are all one thing. The company, the brand, the product experience, they're all parts of a single, spiritual building, so to speak. And that view has helped me see opportunities that most people are blind to, I think. hopefully down the road to capitalize on those opportunities and really fulfill them.
Okay, but as they say, architecture is the mother of all arts. So, so maybe that's what you've just done, incorporated it all into it. Yeah.
It's also, it's sort of it's the source of most of our metaphors for society, right? Like foundation, structure, facade, and also we've got pretty cool offices. Like I for sure should have mentioned that too.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thanks, Anthony, for asking. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. The next person I would like to introduce is Nico MacDonald, who's an RCA supporter. Nico works at the intersection of innovation and creativity. He's a tutor at the Council on International Educational Exchange and an external examiner at Central St. Martin's. And he's recently written extensively about interaction design, including what is web design. So Nico, welcome.
Hi, Nico.
Hi, Evan. I really enjoyed the talk so far. I was interested, I've worked in digital interaction design for about 25 years, and I'm interested in what you've found has changed in the last decade about the way people are using digital interfaces and services, not least your Midwestern moms and your more unusual user base, perhaps.
It's a great question, Nico. Great question. When I was in high school, I lived in rural Pennsylvania, which is, actually next to Amish country, if you know what the Amish are.
Sure.
I got this hand-me-down Macintosh computer. This is in the late 1990s. And when I should have been socializing, this is such a tech nerd stereotype, it's true, unfortunately. When I should have been socializing and dating, and I spent a lot of the time, I don't know why, designing little user interfaces and didn't really know how to code. And at the time I thought I'd missed the window. I was probably like 6 years, like, oh, all the good coders start when they're 11. I don't know where that came from, that story. But I got really obsessive with redesigning the skins of MP3 players or like redoing the whole OS. And so I never studied interaction design or user interface design, but it's something that I gravitated to since I was, in high school. And then I think with Pinterest and Facebook before that, the last 15 years since iOS was introduced, it's just been this really fun time where we've been able to, on that platform and then on Android, come up with new patterns and ideas about how to use the different inputs and outputs. And so I think Pinterest had some pretty great little innovations and things like that over the years. And so that's been where I've been focused. But increasingly, when you ask the question, how has the last decade changed how we use these interfaces? I think from a much different perspective now. I think much less about kind of graphic design, interaction, art of user interfaces, and more about the psychology of how people are using digital services. Trying to think about how to talk about this. I don't want to go on and on, Nico, but well, okay, let me start with this way. Maybe y'all know this. I didn't know this till maybe like 5 years ago. The way hardware is designed in computing is modeled after the human nervous system, to be very simplistic about it. It's literally modeled after memory and sensor, all these things. And there's a way in which, I think I said this earlier, what the internet is, it's by far the biggest object ever designed by our species. And it's gonna become so much bigger. And it's literally a digital, it's a nervous system. And it's a nervous system that has devices that are designed to interface with our nervous system, right? So our dominant sensory input is vision. I'm looking at a huge screen in front of me, right? Because the machine of the computer outputs what I need to input primarily. And what's been really difficult for me with Pinterest has been trying to understand, all right, if we're interfacing with people's nervous systems all day, that's what media is. Are we having good impacts? Are we having is it healthy the way we're doing that? Is it not healthy? Is the experience is it leaving people's nervous systems better or worse? And trying to find a framework in psychology or psychiatry, trying to find a framework by which to judge that. Really, I don't want to say it's impossible, because there are scales for depression and anxiety, and there are measures of some facets of the human experience. But I haven't found anyone with a good answer. Here's how you measure if you're doing a good job or not, helping people have a healthy nervous system. And I go there with your question because could go on for hours about this. I'm trying to, because I mean, to me, the great frontier, so to speak, of the age is the human nervous system. I mean, it truly is. We're just now getting our heads around the complexity of the brain. We still don't have the computing power to really do that. And the nervous system is more than the brain. It's all the nerves in your body, and they're all interconnected. And we don't understand. It's maybe where medical science was 150 years ago, and that we're just wrapping our heads around this, a scientific understanding of the whole. And I say this as a layperson, not an expert. So I think that the big question moving forward, given how ubiquitous and addictive YouTube is for me, to watch it like an hour last night when I should have been preparing answers. I also prepared answers. is how do we understand if these services are having healthy outcomes or not for people? What does that mean psychologically? What are measures for that? What are the different inputs we consider? And that is the key, because if this global nervous system is going to have a great outcome or a bad outcome, like we need to understand the trajectory that it's having on the world with better accuracy. Otherwise, it's just going to be out of control, and that's a really scary proposition.
That's a really interesting answer. I guess BJ Fogg at Stanford's probably one of the key thinkers in this area, and influencers of social media company founders and others. But I should leave it there, Evan, because I know we're short on time.
Actually, we have a little bit of time, and I think this is also just it's a beautiful question, and I wonder maybe if it's okay, we could stay with it for a few minutes, because I think thinking through the internet as a nervous system is an incredible image. But I wonder, there must always be a tension between that attention economy and wanting to harvest more attention from people, and then on the other, but also knowing at the same time that it's potentially addictive for some people, and that you can produce both positive but also negative effects from that. And I wonder, for example, would a company like Pinterest be speaking to people to neuroscientists, for example, or to people that are studying attention and or addiction, or et cetera, and how those kinds of things function?
Yeah. We've worked with neuroscientists and psychologists and the story that took hold the last 2 years of the attention economy, and the academic story, the popular story, Social Dilemma. I know the guys who made that pretty well out here. I think it's a really important view for culture to have on the internet and on the services that are being built. What none of them really propose is a solution, and solution implies that there's one problem. So maybe a better framing is what none of them really have a good proposal for is a path forward that has healthier outcomes at scale. And there are some very basic things that can be built, you've been on YouTube for an hour, maybe you want to go outside, just little, I say basic because that's not hard to build that. But the more impactful and sophisticated things, I think, really come out of this is my view, what I was saying, which is, what frameworks do we want to use to measure the human nervous system, to measure the health of a human experience? And we, at least the way I grew up, was taught almost nothing about emotions, about trauma, about the way I'm wired. And that's changing. Stigma is lowering with all of this, with mental health. And education programs are being funded, at least in the United States, through a lot of elementary schools. But even those frameworks around what emotions are, how you relate to your own emotions, am I the victim of them? Am I in control of so I spent the last 5 years just on my own journey trying to understand myself, and I'm still opening that door. Maybe it's 30%, 10% open, I don't know. But I'm kind of going in circles here. It's, as I said earlier, it is the frontier of our age. I did a week retreat maybe 5 years ago out here in California. And it was just on some very basic patterns of behavior. Why do you do the things you do? Kind of where did that originate in your history? And it was the most profound experience I've ever had, to have this awareness of my behavior and their roots in my life. And just to have awareness of why you're behaving, why you're feeling the way you do, gives you so much more agency over how you live, over how your consciousness is expressed. And I know I've kind of ventured away from the question, but I don't see an answer to the question, what's the path forward with the internet for consumers, that doesn't go through this very kind of it's uncharted in some ways topology of the human nervous system and human consciousness. Like we need a map of all of these things if we're going to understand how to help channel experience on the internet to a place that has good outcomes at the scale of billions of users. So I'm determined to stay with this complexity, to not have a simple single answer or single story, and to try and find over the next few years or decades, I don't know, solutions or paths forward that are healthier. So that was a very theoretical answer maybe, but I'll say one more thing, which is just to take it back to the short term and tactical. I think there's a lot of truth to how addictive these services can be. And I think they're just very simple things that we could do as an industry or as a political body to put some guardrails on the more extreme things, on misinformation, on polarization, on I don't know, just helping people make sure they're not spending all of their time on the phone. I struggle with that. And you'd think I would at least have a better sense than most because I work in the industry. But I'm really a victim of my phone in many ways. And that just says to me that there's probably a much larger problem that can be addressed in the short term as we think about longer term outcomes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Nico, as well for prompting that. Really is an incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nico.
I'd like to call Chris Francis, who's also an alum from 1997 in computer-related design. He's coming to us from Toronto in Canada. Chris has a background in graphic design with over 20 years experience working in the UK, San Francisco, and Canada. And is currently working in video games as a presentation art director at Ubisoft in Toronto. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Welcome. Hi, Evan. Hi, Adrian. Nice to meet you both. My question is, does Pinterest see itself as becoming more of a content creator rather than just a way of recording like visual inspiration dreams? I use it myself often like that, but just wondered if that's what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, thanks for answering, Chris. Nice to meet you. Increasingly, we're interested in the opportunity to. So if I zoom out, we've tried to anchor the company on this idea of inspiration as the core of everything we do. What does inspiration mean for people? How do we help people find the inspiration that enables them to go create a life they love, create a project? Trying to really anchor on that moment of inspiration. And the more we study that psychologically, the more we see that, like see what media does inspire people, the more we think there's an opportunity to build inspirational media. And I don't know what that will look like. We're going to make a TV channel, maybe not. We're going to build a video game, maybe not. Although I think video games are really like much more evolved and sophisticated digital experience than most consumer internet products are. But I think understanding what inspiration is for people, who inspires people, and channeling that through the larger culture is something that's really interesting. And I don't have anything more specific to say because there's nothing to talk about yet. But it's a very wise question and one we're thinking a lot about right now.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'll be interested to see what the future content creation of Pinterest is. So,
thanks. Me too.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
Yes.
I'd like to introduce Maunika Chowdhury, who's an alumni 2020 Innovation Design Engineering. Maunika is in London, and she's an interdisciplinary designer and technologist based here and in New York City. And she graduated from the IDE program last July, and her work focuses on human interactions and empathy. Welcome.
Hi, Evan. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I was just wondering, my question is, as a designer, how do you incorporate empathy into your work?
Well, to focus on Pinterest. So when I was in architecture school, 2010, I built Pinterest as a side project. But then before I actually worked at Pinterest full time, I went to work at Facebook for a year. It's May 2009, excuse me. And one of the things I saw at that company was how much, of course, data it had about users, what they're clicking on, they're doing, but how all of that data crowded out the input that is less quantitative, so crowded out more empathetic inputs to the company. And with Pinterest, I was really determined, and still am, to not let data be the only source of knowledge or information as we build things. And so I think I said this earlier, but one of the things we very proactively invest in as a company is bringing stories into the company from users. And so that looks like I said, us traveling and meeting with people and listening. It looks like us sending a team out to shoot a video and showing that to the company. It looks like us flying before COVID users in to the company to speak about different topics or different experiences they've had. And we also, every year we have a big 2-day employee conference. Actually, it was just Thursday and Friday. It's called KnitCon, where the whole company shuts down and employees teach each other skills that are not about work usually. And also we fly in kind of creators and users to just talk and share and participate. And I'm blown away time and time again how valuable the sort of narrative, story-based insights are and how they complement the data we have. So for example, for years, there's this debate about shopping on Pinterest. Where should we focus? Should we build a native checkout experience so that if you see something you like, you can check out without having to go to a website or blah, blah, blah. And there are all these internal debates about, what people were clicking on and tapping and what that meant for what we should build next. But then we would travel. I remember we traveled to the Netherlands, I think it was 2019. You just talk to people and they're like, yeah, I see something cool, I want to buy it. And you just heard that over and over and over again. I mean, it's very obvious, but I see something cool, but I don't know what it is or how to get it, And that's not maybe not empathy, but that subjective input was it's so distilling and obvious. And so what we did is we went and built this very simple computer vision stuff that says, here's an image, we match it to the products that are buyable and we serve them underneath. And then you see something, hopefully you can scroll down and buy the thing in the image. And that's that combining the data we have with the sort of stories we hear from people, I think it leads to such better decisions when it comes to what we're building. And that's true in things that are more emotional as well. Like a lot of the reason people use Pinterest is emotional. It's like, I want a quote to pick me up. Or it's like really extreme, like I got diagnosed with cancer and I'm looking for just like support or motivation. And I think having empathy with users has led us to make decisions like Pinterest needs to be safe. It needs to be a place where you're not going to feel judged. Pinterest needs to be free from like bullying or attacking experiences. Otherwise, you're not going to feel open and creative and expressive. I think empathy has led us, hopefully, to a place that's more compassionate. So we're trying to understand now when users are searching for things that imply they're feeling anxious or depressed, and we try and serve people, mental health practices that are proven in those circumstances. They don't have to use them, but just trying to be compassionate in the way we design the experience. But I think empathy as a motivator is still a huge opportunity for the entire internet, but for Pinterest as well. So I think it's a really wise question.
Yeah, I love that you value the users, especially as a Pinterest user. I kind of use Pinterest to escape other social medias because I feel like it is that safe space. So at least for me as a user, it's working.
Oh, I'm glad. And thank you for using it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our last question is one of my colleagues, Clive Grigne, who's the head of program at Service Design. Clive's here in London, and he's an expert in service design, design thinking, and digital and technology innovation, who's led award-winning design teams around the globe. And he took over as head of program from the RCA's service design course in September 2019. Welcome, Clive. Glad you could join us.
Hi, great. Thank you very much, Evan. Really nice to meet you. My question is somewhat linked to the last one, actually. Pinterest is a source of visual inspiration in an otherwise very technical and analytical world, very critical world, especially in this pandemic. It's all been about science and how do we solve world problems through technology. What are your thoughts on how we balance technology with human empathy and creativity?
Thank you, Clive, for asking. And there's so many ways into that question. Let me think of the one that might be the most. I became pretty disillusioned with, well, first of all, we use the word technology in a very loose way in our society, at least in the United States. Technology or tech is like this cutting edge of tech. It's like anything on the phone maybe is tech now. It's a little confusing. the way we use the word, but of course technology is, like a pen is technology. And I think I became kind of disillusioned the last decade with this role of technology in the world. In the United States, there's this long history of technology really being the set of like the founding myths of country, and a lot of the founding figures are technologically driven. And there are all these narratives throughout the history of the United States of the technology of the time, the axe clearing the forest, the railroads conquering the continent, the internet, the spaceship. I mean, there's just this history of technologically driven mythos. And I became quite disillusioned with that, seeing the way that technology can be something that we're just sort of like, it's happening to us. New technology comes along and it just sort of happens to society, and maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, maybe nobody can really know in the moment. And that's a little scary. But then, I had the incredible privilege right before the pandemic, it was February 2020, of flying to India for the first time. And I got to go to the Gandhi ashram in Ahmedabad, which is this commune, essentially, to simplify it, where he and his family lived, the extended group for many years. And I read his autobiography and got to meet his grandson and some people who grew up there. And it was there was this unbelievable story. So there was this man, I think his name was Jayesh Patel, who grew up on this ashram in Ahmedabad. And his father had been a sanitation engineer, so basically a toilet engineer that Gandhi had brought into the ashram, because at the time, I think 1% of the country had running water toilets, essentially. And there's this whole caste system around human waste. And now I think it's something like 90% of the country has toilets. And the impact on society and on human health and on, lowering violence against women, of giving people a place safe to use a toilet. It was this, I hope this doesn't sound too weird, but it was this incredible realization of what technology is fundamentally and how powerful it can be and how important it is in life. Mm-hmm. So I think technology is incredible. But at the same time, like we were talking about earlier, this technology we've built of the internet, this quite literal digital nervous system that's connecting almost the entire planet, not yet, but it's getting there. I mean, it's going to create emergent properties. Like consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, right? An emergent property is one that isn't exhibited in the individual subcomponent. It's a time of great opportunity and great peril for the world, wiring everyone together, putting everyone in the same nervous system. And so I forget what your question was, Clive, but
well, it was just about how do we balance technology with empathy and creativity?
I see.
What is the connection between them might be a better question.
There is this interesting bias, right? That technology is analytical and rational. And I mean, it's true that the machines we've built operate in very rigid binary rules. But, paintbrush is technology, and it's not, it enables creativity and expression, and Pinterest. So I think using technology to fuel human creativity and expression, empathy, that's sort of the whole point of technology, right? Is to create health and flourishing and well-being and empathy. So maybe that's a very simple answer. I'm sorry if it's not helpful, but that's what comes to mind.
No, it's very helpful. I think we just worry sometimes about some of the new technologies like AI and things like that it's very easy to be frightened of. And just how do we make sure that we're in control, I think, is perhaps what I'm driving at.
Well, one thing I would say to that is I've noticed a tendency with people who aren't really great at math or really great at logic to assume that they can't understand things like AI, or to there's a lot of shame in people's not understanding technology. And I don't think that's right at all. I think you don't have to be a math major to really, help direct great AI. We've built tons of AI. I've been part of that. I didn't study math. I can do math okay, but it's not my strength. And so I think humanism and humanist values need to be introduced into technology. And I think that requires people who aren't, who wouldn't think of technology as their profession to get involved and to have strong opinions and to be competent.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Clive.
Thanks, Evan. Great answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. And thank you, Evan, especially for giving us a kind of an insight into that kind of the mixed feelings around these emerging properties and some of the both like the sources of optimism around them, but also some of the potential risks and perils, as he said. I think that's really, it's an incredibly timely thing for us all to kind of be aware of and to think about, especially after spending a year doing everything on Zoom platforms as we are at the moment. So thanks a lot for being just so unguarded and also really clear about all of those issues. It's been really a pleasure. I did want to ask you about your renovation of your home and this architectural project that you've got going, but I think we've run out of time. So Paul's joined us again. Hi, Paul.
Hi there. That was really interesting. Thank you both very much. It was fantastic, really, really insightful, and as Adrian said, very, very unguarded, very interesting, unguarded, which is always nice. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and for everyone who's still here for listening. And I hope you have just a phenomenal 2021. And I have this instinct that the students who've gone through the last year as students are going to come out probably the most remarkable set of students and maybe the most remarkable community. This is just an instinct.
Yeah, that this will be right.
A long time. So really excited to see what everyone creates.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Okay. Have a wonderful day.
Bye then.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you.